Welcome everyone to Bounce Off Podcast. We are joined by former co-founder of ScrewAttack and GameAttack, now VP for content for Prairie Fire and host of the Side Scrollers podcast, and of course, former gunner for the Bandits in 2003. It is Craig Skistimas. How are you doing today, Craig?
Well, I'm doing well, and thanks for saying, of course, former gunner for the Bandits. You know, of course.
Why else would you be here?
The most notable thing of my career, I was a gunner for the Bandits. Yeah, it was good times for sure.
What I quite like is that, so you were able to spend one season in SlamBall, and we won't get too much into that today, but I like that it seems to have prevailed through your career as you've gone on to other things. It's always something you've wanted to talk about or bring up, or that fans of your content have gone, hey, were you in this years ago? And you have highlight reels up there, and I know that you've still got the tape library and stuff. So it's nice to see that you're still excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, I've legitimately been excited about it since before I played it. I mean, that was kind of the origin story of me being involved, was I was just so excited about it. You know, I'm a big fan of like video games and NBA Jam, and for me, that's what SlamBall was and is. It's a real life video game of NBA Jam, and being able to do, you know, insane dunks and dunk on guys is something that, you know, not just dunk on guys, but dunk on guys from, you know, 5 feet above the rim is something that's spectacular. So I've always been a fan of SlamBall. I always wanted to be a part of SlamBall. I just haven't been invited to be a part of SlamBall.
Right. So I was going to ask about that. You put something out in August of last year on Twitter where you said that they were emailing you repeatedly asking you to come back. And it's one of those internet things. I couldn't tell if it was sarcastic or not. So they haven't contacted you yet.
No. So I've actually spoke to Rob Wilson probably couple months ago, when I first heard that SlamBall was coming back. I was like, hey, how can I be involved? I'd love to be involved, really any way. And I was told that I wasn't a high priority for SlamBall. So I was like, oh, okay, well, that's good. But I've been probably the biggest champion for SlamBall since it went off the air. And honestly, probably the most notable SlamBall player, like just online over the last 20 years, as far as people asking me about SlamBall on the regular. I mean, you know, I've had this career online and you know, I've talked about SlamBall. You know, when I started my first company, ScrewAttack, I did that. I mean, I definitely wanted to continue playing SlamBall while ScrewAttack was happening. So I put together like highlight reels and I stayed in shape and all that stuff. And, but yeah, I just never came to be. I just wasn't what they were looking for with SlamBall. And you know, we talked. I was like, hey, you know, I would love to eventually coach SlamBall, because I think that there's a lot there. There's a lot of meat on that bone that is not being really touched on right now. But you know, maybe I can get in with if Bear ever goes back or something like that. Like be an assistant coach or something.
So you said you want to be involved in it anyway, whether it be, you've mentioned coaching there, but you've also thrown out the idea of doing commentary, sideline reporting. Is it still the case that you still want to get involved, even though you've sort of been pushed to the side? Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, I at this point, I kind of feel like the dog on the outside going, please let me in, you know, please let me in. And, but the reality is that you know, and I told Rob this as well, like he was like, hey, if you want to be involved, put together, you know, like a big coaching pamphlet type thing. And then I just looked at my schedule this summer and it wasn't going to make sense anyway. So, you know, while I would love to have been associated with it this time around and done commentary, I mean, it's like, you know, not many people have played it and made a living talking for a living. So it seemed like a pretty good fit. And have a degree in journalism, and specifically like sports journalism, play-by-play and all that stuff. So it would have been a really good fit for me personally, but obviously it wasn't for SlamBall. But I mean, whatever, you know, obviously I will still be a fan of the sport and hope it's wildly successful. But I think that it's interesting to kind of see some of the decisions that have been made, though. So,
well, they've obviously got a 2-year contract with ESPN, and what's been hammered home to me from players and coaches is that it's not with any of the players, it's not with any of the coaching staff, it's specifically the league and ESPN. So there's almost certainly going to be a second season, and there's almost certainly going to be more opportunities for people like yourself to get involved in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a safe way of saying nobody has a job next season. I think that's a better way of saying it, is that since nobody is contracted, no coaches, no players have, you know, I'm just reading through the lines when I hear that, is that nobody's safe and you better perform, right? And I think that's also the reality of television, right? Because let's be real, right? SlamBall is a really fun sport. It's fun. It's spectacular to play, right? It's so much fun, but it is still a TV product. And if it wasn't a TV product, then they wouldn't have made changes to the game this year, like limiting one face-off per quarter, right? They wouldn't have done that. They would have kept the game intact that way. And like, you don't, like in basketball, they don't just stop shooting free throws after the second free throw, right? Because it slows the game down. No. And so like, that's kind of how I look at it. I've been on both sides of it, kind of the sports side of it and the production side for the TV product, not SlamBall's TV production, but I understand how it works. And, that's something that kind of caught me when I was watching that. But with that said, I'm very interested. Have you actually seen the ratings for the first week? I've not seen.
No, I've not seen anything like that. I have reached out because the day that this interview will come out, there's also going to be a sort of Q&A podcast from Bounce Off where I'm sort of addressing any questions that fans have. And someone has asked me, how is the league feeling? So I'm sort of waiting for their press team to get back to me on if they've seen it as a success or a failure. I think failure would be very unfair, but if there's things that need to be worked on, I would guess, looking at, obviously they're so heavily featured on ESPN Plus rather than terrestrial television, I would assume that they're more worried about subscription numbers and viewership online versus live on ESPN, and driving those subscriptions to then get more opportunities on live television. But that's just speculation on my part. So I don't know. I'm hoping we find out from the league at some point what their goal is. But I know that internally, the goal for the league isn't necessarily to have it be this amazing ESPN product. It's to build up the teams to the level that they can get sold off to individual owners, and it can start to grow more as a sport rather than, as you're saying, an entertainment property.
Right. And I think all that makes sense. From ESPN, they're investing in something that is being aired during a downtime in sports programming traditionally. This 1 month, 6 week time period where all the main sports are done. We're gearing up for football season here in the United States. They have something that they can put on Sports Center, with top tens, and it makes sense for ESPN to invest highly, from a production standpoint of it. So I don't know what that deal looked like, and I would only be speculating with what it looked like, but I would think that there's probably a minimal amount of money paid for the fees for SlamBall, if any. But I think that they probably cover the production cost of it, which was very big. Obviously the venue that they're shooting in looks outstanding. So now I personally question the yellow and the black. I think that looks really kind of like vomit, but that's just me.
I'll say this much: you've been higher on the jerseys than pretty much anyone else I've spoken to. So that's one thing.
I think the mob jersey is really nice. The black pinstripe. I think the pinstripes always look cool. But they look, I know some people, it's tough when you deal with jerseys, right? Everyone has this unique idea of what they should look like. And the reality is that you're going to appease nobody on it because everyone thinks they know they should look like better than you. And at the end of the day, I live in Dallas. So like the Mavericks and the Cowboys, right? Cowboys have had a pretty static look for the better part of 50 years, right? Their jerseys have always looked the same, but the Mavericks have had like 6 different jerseys in the last 2 years. They're all over the place. It's always looking to, have this new look for kids. And, so there are some jerseys are going to work. Some jerseys aren't. I think that, at least they've tried, right? I think go back to that. And I don't mind them as much as other people do.
Okay, perfect. Something that you mentioned a second ago was you were talking about this is a great time of year to be doing it. You said on your Rumble live stream when the first sessions were going on last Friday that this is the perfect time of year to be doing it in this downtime. A lot of what the league wants to be doing is, and this was an interview from earlier in the year with one of the co-producers of the league, but also it's being reiterated since then. They want to sort of turn the league into a similar setup to professional tennis or professional golf, in that they want to have sort of 4 tournaments a year type thing, and then teams compete in those. Do you think that's viable, or do you think it could only work in this time slot, this time of year?
I'd be interested to hear what other time slots they want to pop it in. Do they want to do one over the Christmas break? Do they want when are they trying to generate that captive audience? Right, because they can do this right here, but there are very other few times throughout the year that allow you to do this, especially if each one of these tournaments is going to take place I don't know. Do they take place over the course of a week? Do they take place over 2 weeks? Do they take place over a month? And if that's the case, are you keeping the same players around? How are you training those rosters? There's so many logistical questions I have when it comes to that. You know, do you have a full-time facility where people can go train and they can learn? All the players have to go to that facility, and then are they shipped off to these different areas? Is LaMonica Garrett going to put on his Mob jersey and he's going to go out and play again? Is Trevor Anderson going to go out and play? Like, you know, there's so many questions that I have, right? And I know that I think that's a really good idea in principle. I think one of the worst things that they could do, it's funny because when you talk about like a tour, I've heard that kind of be floated around as well. The idea of a tour is, I understand why they floated it, but I would be hesitant to, because you think of like successful basketball tours that have worked over the years. I immediately go back to like the And One Mixtape tour, right? And One Mixtape worked because initially it was a ground roots thing, right? It was a grassroots, right? You go out and you can see these guys playing on a pickup court. Do you remember that like 20 years ago?
Yeah.
Right. So they get on a bus, they go from city to city. They say, we're going to be at this park, and they play. And eventually they graduated up to a facility with 1,500 seats, then 5,000 seats. Then they're doing arenas, right? SlamBall doesn't necessarily have that. And the thing people like about SlamBall primarily are dunks and hits, right? Let's be really, you know, all this stuff about working on the island, that's like Mason and Coach Kirsch wanting that to work, right? But nobody's going to watch it for that, right? The hardcore are going to watch for that. But with a tour, if somebody goes out to a tour, the first thing they're going to want to do is they're going to say, how do I get on a court? How do I dunk? How do I take off? And I think that's when you're lugging around a court that cost $500,000, you know, and you're putting it up in in different arenas or cities, that's a big ask. And I don't know if SlamBall can pull, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people in an arena right now. Maybe it can by the time if momentum picks up, but I don't know. That'd be interesting to see. And it depends on what like if they can televise those things as well. If it's strictly a televised thing. So
do you think part of that problem is relatability? You mentioned again on that Rumble Stream Night 1 that there's no way to get invested in certain teams because they're not connected to cities. You're just sort of picking one at random. But then also, like you've just said, there's not really any opportunity to have an experience playing the game ourselves. And a lot of the reasons that people get into sports is because they play them when they're younger and then they follow that sport growing up. And no one's grown up playing SlamBall. Is that maybe the difficulty here, that there's no relatability factor?
Right. There's definitely I wouldn't say a relatability. I think there's a gatekeeping, right? And it's by nobody purposely standing there with a gate or a key, right? But it's the idea that there's one court and that court costs a ton of money, right? What's the biggest sport in America right now? It's pickleball, right? Pickleball is growing drastically. What's the biggest sport in the world? Soccer. What's the biggest, major sport, baseball, basketball, pick any of them. Why are they popular? Because you pick up a ball and you can do it right there, right? In SlamBall, you have to learn for 2 weeks before you can even think about doing anything, right? There's a giant barrier of entry attached to SlamBall, which makes it very hard. And biggest thing from a business perspective, liability, right? Like that's scary for a business to say, yeah, come on onto our Olympic style trampolines and why don't you just try to dunk from the sideline? That's a big ask. That's from a liability perspective. Whereas with all those other sports, like I said, pickleball, you got this, you hit it over this net, boom, 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 boom. And it's easy and it's small and it's compact. It's easy for young people and old people to play. SlamBall, there's a very specific window that you can play. I'm 42 years old, right? There's no way in hell I could get on a SlamBall court right now. You have a very specific window from like your late teens to maybe your late 20s, right? Rare exception, maybe early 30s, that you could probably get on the court and not have your body just destroyed. And like, I think it's, I look at it just realistically, right? SlamBall is an amazing game. It's so much fun. But and that's kind of one thing you saw in the first weekend was the injuries attached to the teams. It's crazy. And that's the one question I get all this time is like, man, SlamBall, you must have seen the worst injuries ever. And my response has always been, it's just like any other sport, how you learn how not to get hurt, right? You learn how to avoid hits. You learn how to fall. Now, there are some rare occasions where a guy gets his ankle ripped down to a tendon, right? You know, we saw that 20 years ago. I watched this guy named Tom do that, and that was scary, right? But you see that in football. The guy gets knocked out unconscious. You see this in basketball where, a shin gets knocked out, a major dislocation out of a, whatever, right?
The big one being Paul George just landing from a layup and immediately snapping. Is like that can happen randomly.
It happens. But it happens more randomly when 10 feet of altitude and trampolines are added to it. You know what I mean? So, so to answer your question all the way back, do I think a tour is a good idea? I think it's a good idea on paper, but I think there's a lot of factors attached to that.
Okay, so there's logistical issues for sure. On the injury thing, do you see that as like a big concern for the league going forward? We talked privately that you were saying that there's no way that they could, like, week 2 looks like a difficult decision for them right now because of injuries. From my perspective, it's only really affecting one team. Unfortunately, it's the team that I picked to root for before the season started. But you said, how can they be doing this if they're already having to use reserve players? They've introduced things like their taxi squad. They are thinking about this stuff a little bit more than maybe they did in 2003. But do you still think it's not being considered enough by the league?
No, I think the idea, and I want to be like really clear when I say this, because I know that some people are going to watch this and they're going to be like, all you do is talk bad about SlamBall. No. I am SlamBall's biggest fan. I want SlamBall to be successful, right? But when you watch the NBA on TNT and you watch Charles Barkley and Kenny Smith and Shaq talk about the NBA, not everything is going to be happy-go-lucky, right? You need to be critical. You have to look at things with a critical eye to really, to be truthful about the situation, right? And I think limiting the roster, having the rosters go down from 8 to 7 is just an insane decision. And maybe it came down to they wanted to pay the players more or whatever. But if that's it, that's fine. Maybe they should have had less teams than 8, because I think that you go from 8 to 7, the amount of injuries that people are picking up on a day-to-day, game-to-game basis is a lot. And they're doing it in these sessions right now, which once again, on paper sounds really good. But as a player, like, we've all been there where we played in a league, right? Like, I'll speak for, my experience. You play in an old man basketball league, right now. And this is, there's nothing on the table here, right? It's just, but you'll play in a tournament on a Friday night and you win a game against a team. The team after you wins the game, and then you play each other, right? So you got a team playing directly after each other. Well, naturally, the team that just got done playing is going to be exhausted, right? And I think that from one of the things I've seen on the site, they've talked about on the SlamBall League site is, the health and safety of the players. And I think that that's all with good intentions. I think that they are making strides, right? The idea of, I've seen it during the games, they've been very conscious about keeping the equipment on. Get your helmet, keep your helmet on, keep your elbows on, keep your knee pad, whatever. Keep all that on. And that's all really good in theory. The problem is that you're going to be running through players by the amount of games that you're having them play on a weekend, right? It is a very physical game. And I think that in theory it is. And I think you've actually seen, or at least what I've seen, is a lot of the teams avoiding contact to make it to that next game, or just because they don't want to be hit, right? I think the game is at least right now, and this could change over the next 2, 3, 4 weeks. Now, there have been some massive hits. Yeah. Don't make me wrong, but I think overall, I go back to like a game like basketball, right? Basketball or even football, right? Everyone talks about the big hits in football, right? Boom, that guy got laid out. What happens in football is it's like the linemen, right? The guys who are up front, those are the guys who are taking the hits consistently, starting here and boom, running into each other, trying to create a block. Those hits are never talked about, right? Mm-hmm. Those type of hits in SlamBall, kind of the constant rubbing and the pushing of on a player in the open court. I feel like that stuff's missing. But then again, I'm having a hard time keeping track of the action because the camera is kind of all over the place. But,
so is that your biggest, just on that, do you think that production needs to step up a little bit? I know you said there's so many cameras, they want to make use of them all. They want to show that this is a big budget product, but sometimes stripping it back is better.
Right, right. Yeah. I think that, so from what I see, from a production perspective, is they have three main cameras on the court. They have a camera in the middle, and they have two cameras on each side getting the action coming towards you, right? And they're leaning very heavily on each side of the court. So when the action comes in there, I think they need to stick to that middle camera and only go to the side cameras when they absolutely need to, right? Keep the focus on a central broadcast style shot and follow the action back and forth. In basketball, or any sport, you make a basket, then you have your hero shot, them running back down the court, you get 2 seconds of them and you talk about whatever happened. SlamBall, you don't have that because the action happens so quick, right? So I think you keep it with that static shot as long as you need to. When there's some sort of impact and the ball is stationary in a trampoline for a short amount of time, that's when you cut in tight and you get that action that's tight. But yeah, it's been really hard to follow, and I think for all the greatness that's come from working off the island, you've seen some really nice passing plays.
Mm-hmm.
There's that one that was tweeted that had the mob were running people through and pulling the stopper off until it led to the lob where the guy came over the top. It was a beautiful play, but you couldn't see it develop. Right. So think about that from if I had LaMonica Garrett using a telestrator to say, this is what happened, that would be so useful from a viewer's perspective, and like a telestrator, that's not a big budget item, from a TV production. I mean, you can do it right now on OBS or Zoom. So I think that there appears to be a big push with SlamBall to quote unquote, legitimize the game or make it a little more analytical, right? We're seeing this a lot of these plays through the island and such, and that's awesome. But from a casual viewer's perspective, if I'm just tuning in, I don't know what I'm looking at.
Right.
I have no idea what I'm looking at. So it's important that the play-by-play guy and the color guys, they're doing a good job of educating what just happened, why that's important, why that's spectacular. Because the regular viewer is going to understand the body-to-body dunk.
Yeah.
They're going to understand the impact. They're not going to understand what's happening on the floor. And that's the hardest thing to understand.
I think that's difficult when the league has been thrown together is unfair, but it's come together quite fast. And they've not quite been able to work out with ESPN who should be where in terms of communicating that. I think LaMonica Garrett did do a really good job over the weekend. There were things he was pointing out to me as a viewer about, in particular, the way the slashers were handling the mob's offense, which had been so dominant up to that point. There were things he was pointing that were really good, but because they're also trying to get as many eyes on this, for example, LaMonica Garrett isn't on commentary this weekend. He's trying to make it work.
Oh, really?
He's a busy guy as well. So yeah, they just announced today there's another ESPN commentator's joining it, and then a former pro football player. Apologies, don't know either their names off the top of my head, but they're joining the play-by-play guy who was there this weekend. So
man,
they're rotating it out to just get. I suppose that's more people that can broadcast it out and get different eyes on it. But I think LaMonica Garrett really wants to make his schedule work so he can be available for them on a personal level.
To be clear, I think LaMonica did a spectacular job. Right? I think for never really sitting down and doing commentary, I thought he did a really good job calling a game that he very clearly cares about. And I think that Nate Robinson did a good job too. And Nate Robinson, his role in there is the voice of the average fan to go, oh shit, that's awesome. I love this. I love dunks. I love hits. That's awesome. Why did that happen? I don't know. And LaMonica's job is to answer it, right? That's why but I thought LaMonica did like a really, really, really good job. So
they just need to give him more tools to do that communication. Right.
And it's tough because the game, like you think about the thing that makes SlamBall appealing is the idea that it's a fast-paced game. You have 4 5-minute quarters. It moves, boom, 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 right? But what makes, I always go back to football, right? Football, baseball, right? These are talking sports in that action happens, boom, football play happens. It lasts 3 seconds, right? And then you talk about it. You talk about it for another 30 seconds before the next thing happens. SlamBall doesn't have that. So the only time that a color guy could go in and actually provide any sort of commentary on what's being happening or talking about a specific play would either be during a timeout, in between quarters, at halftime, or in between a pre or post game show. But so the big thing is not during the flow of a game.
Yeah.
So, even in soccer or football, right? There's time to talk during the game. It's a talking sport. It allows you to digest things that just happen. And SlamBall doesn't necessarily have that right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it ever will, but we'll see.
It's finding that balance of the highlight plays that you can put out there and also explaining it to people like yourself and myself who really want to get into the nitty gritty on it a little bit more, and finding a way to balance that between finding more casual audience and also making it clear to people that want to be in the know. We talked about all that stuff. Like you said, you don't want to seem as down on it as maybe some of the answers have been thus far. Let's just talk about what are some big positives you've taken away from weekend one, just off the top of your head.
I think that some of the stoppers have been outstanding. I think that they have definitely played well. I don't know many of their names. I know the guy from the Griffins. I actually reached out to him and just said, "Hey, man, really enjoying how you're playing." I think it's Connor.
He's doing a great job of trying to be as available to. I think he's done an interview with every single SlamBall podcast out there thus far, and just he's trying to be available to everyone. So he's doing a great job of spreading the game that way.
Yeah, Connor's done a really good job. I know the guy scored a bunch of points, that 43-point game. And I thought it was the most boring 43 points I may have ever seen. It was, and they're going to need to kind of adjust, because really what he did, he scored probably 20 points from going from the top tramp to the bottom tramp, but he would toss the ball in between. He'd reset the play, which was it's a really boring play. But I'll say this, that guy, he makes the game look easy. Yeah. He makes the game look really easy. And he's smart. I mean, I got to be honest, whether it's a boring 43 or an exciting 43, it's still 43. Yeah. So good for him. I think they've made some really smart plays, some really smart decisions with the actual court itself, widening the court, and something that hasn't been talked about enough is the bottom tramp is considerably wider than what it was compared to the other. When you look at the SlamBall court, all the trampolines used to be the same, but the bottom tramp now is much bigger, and I think that's a really, really smart play. It allows the stopper or defender, specifically on a face-off, to get in front of the rim, something that, when I played back in the day, it was very, very hard to do. You had to be very precise getting in front of the rim. A very precise jump. But I mean, I think the game has been, I thought the first game was a dud. The very first game they played, I thought that was the worst first impression you could possibly have. But I thought the second game was great. That really picked up. I'll be very interested to see kind of what teams do moving ahead. Yeah. I think that, obviously the Mob are a really good team. They're really good, and they're doing things that other teams aren't doing right now. But Coach Kirsch has been, he's been thinking SlamBall for 20 years, right? And what you're seeing right now with some of the players who are coaching is it's considerably easier to play the game than it is to coach the game. And some of the guys who are coaching could do phenomenal things physically, but it's hard to articulate the process of doing that to people who aren't as gifted physically. Right. And that's something that is, I think you see that all the time where players make the adjustment to or the movement over to coaching. Coaching is really hard, and it's hard, to go back and be able to say, well, I did this, so why can't you do that? Or why, and that's a very, very tough thing to do. So, but like I said, I very much want this to work. I've been keeping a close eye on how much ESPN has been talking about it. And they had a big night the first night. I think that one thing that I would love to see as a fan, on ESPN.com specifically, is when the games are happening, I would love to see there to be some sort of statcast or scorecast happening along with them. I think that goes a long way with legitimizing your league or your sport. Where, if you watch a baseball game or a basketball game or anything else, it's there, it's ready to go for you. And, or maybe on the top line, it doesn't need to be right there front and center, but it can be off to the side, on a drop down or something. I think that'd be that'd be really good. Or even just having its own section on ESPN. I mean, WWE has their own section, with their own news and stuff. So you'd think SlamBall should too. So.
And this might sound like a stupid question, given how much we've just talked about it and the fact that you are so invested, but will you be checking out week 2? You didn't seem like week 1 wasn't everything you wanted it to be, but when you're invested in something like this, you're invested. So are you in for the long haul now?
Yeah, of course. Like I said, I very much want this to work. But I think it's okay. Like, I will spout the praises and the fun of SlamBall all day long. But I also want to be realistic about it. And I think the best thing that can happen is for someone to be very honest about SlamBall, especially somebody who's actually played the game and can actually speak to it. Because the reality is that, and I don't know this for a fact, but there's a lot of people who are going to hang around. They're going to go, oh, that's great. That's great. That's great. And they're going to say, they're going to be yes men. All right. You need somebody from the outside being honest about the situation. And they may see it as unfair, and that's fine, but it's honest, right? It's what I see. And I'm not there on a day-to-day basis. So, but I feel like I can speak honestly from a viewer, because I was a fan of it when I first saw it. Then I had the opportunity to play it. And, I've been essentially talking about it for, 18, 19, 20 years since then. Right. So, I feel like I have valuable things to say, and it's up to them whether or not they want to listen to it. But I hope that, you and everybody else knows that I don't want to be seen as just a detractor, because I'm not. I very much want to see this work.
We touched on
I can't stress that enough.
No, of course. I think anyone who's taking the time to be as engaged with it as you are would be an idiot to go, and I also want it to fail. I think if you're on Twitter actively talking about the sport, and again, I've looked at your tweets going back 5 years at minimum, talking about how you're excited for it to come back. Would be crazy to then go, let's get it. 1 week was enough. Right. Very quick, we did touch on it slightly, but have you got any favorite players, or have you got a team that you've decided to root for this season?
I'm going to root for the Buzzsaw, just from Coach H. He's, Coach H and Coach Bear. Bear was my coach, and they're great friends. So, I think Coach H and his coaching mentality is great. Obviously, the Mob are going to be great. They'll probably win it, most likely. The team I'm most disappointed in is definitely the Rumble. I think the Rumble are, I think that's most people's major disappointment on the season. But I said this before, I think Coach Carter, and I don't mean to speak ill will of the guy. I want to be really clear. I think he's a super talented coach, but you win when you have the best players. And the old school Rumble had the best players. Jelani Janice was the best player. White was an amazing player. Dion Mays, an amazing player. These guys were Lockjaw, amazing players. These guys were spectacular in their own right. So you win when you have the best players, and that makes it a lot easier to win. And I don't know if necessarily he has the best players right now, so it's making it harder to win. So.
And then I'd like to finish out this interview with possibly a strange question, but do you have any questions for me regarding the league? Maybe things that you need like an answer on with how it's gone thus far, or anything that I can help with as someone who's trying to look at this way more than anyone else.
Yeah,
right now.
And you are, which is great. So how do you think it's gone so far? Honestly.
I mean, the honest answer is you're right that the first game could have been better. But as someone who's become obsessed with this sport in the last couple of weeks, seeing a team like the Mob prove that having some sort of tactical thought put into the game instead of just dunk after dunk after dunk can take you somewhere is a really good sign for people who want to see this as a legitimate sport. Because if it came down to just, well, this guy can dunk the most, so this team's going to win, it wouldn't be as interesting to follow. And you would get people who would drop in and go, well, that's a great dunk, and then they'd get bored of it. So I think it's really good to have a team like that. What's not great is how far ahead of everyone they seem to be right now. But I think the Buzzsaw and the Wrath have both got opportunities to prove that they are that close this weekend. I think that the social media team's been pretty good, albeit a bit too flippant maybe about the fact that they don't know what's going on. And that's understandable. Everyone involved in the organization seems to be pretty new to this, and that's understandable. It's been gone for 15 years, but I think it's gone pretty well. I think that the measure will be how the rest of the season goes. Again, tonight as this is airing, tomorrow night as we've recorded this interview, they're back on ESPN2 for some games. So seeing the reaction to that's going to be interesting as well.
You know, and let me actually take a step back, and I appreciate everything you just said, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds like you can look at this from a logical and critical eye, right? I'll say this. SlamBall is when you look at the company that's behind SlamBall, right? With Mason and is it Robbins or Tollins? I'm not quite sure which one it is, right? It used to be Tollin Robbins. I don't think they're together anymore. But the production company behind this, the media company behind this, they're great at telling stories.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that when you look at the story behind this, of this, there's this hashtag, bring back SlamBall, right? It had over 1 million views or whatever it was. I think that's a great story, but I don't see that. I never saw that hashtag. And I mean, but it obviously worked well enough for them to bring the sport back and catch ESPN's eye. But I think nostalgia is a very dangerous thing, right? I think a lot of people will hop in it. Like you see this in the comments on YouTube videos on ESPN or whatever. They see, oh shit, I can't believe SlamBall's back. That's amazing. I used to watch that when I was X years old.
Yeah.
And now it's cool when they come back 20 years later, but will they come back in week 2?
Yeah.
And that's the most important question, right? So will it be taken seriously, by those at ESPN? I think having a 2-year deal is a godsend. But I'm very intrigued to see it, to see kind of where they go with this. And I want to see the ratings. As far as the, I know that there was big ratings, 20 years ago on Spike. I saw this article saying about like it failed because the ratings, that was never why SlamBalls failed the first time. But yeah, like I said, I can't stress this enough. I know people are going to look at this and some people will probably be upset at me because the way I'm speaking about this, right? Yeah. But they shouldn't be, right? And I'm not going to tell you, well, actually, I'm going to tell you how you should feel because I want to see this succeed, right? And I think it's important to look at a critical eye. And you could just, call me the, Kenny Smith or Shaq or Chuck, talking about this. And I think it's important that somebody does. And I will be the biggest champion of this league ever. But I just think that there are things that could be done for the player's safety. First and foremost, the player's safety, which ultimately will gravitate up to the league being successful as well. Because the same reason why you see NBA players taking rests or having, these games where these stretches where they don't play for 3, 4, 5 games, was it load management? Are the same reasons why I have concerns for SlamBall players. There is no load management at all. And we're just 1 week into this thing and it looks like a MASH unit out there. So I think that looking at the team, and this is something that you may actually be able to speak to a little bit better, but looking at the starting lineups from week 1 to week 4 and seeing what they look like and who's still playing is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and some teams have already had to make, like I said, the Wrath have been riddled with injuries, but that's like the league is working, because I have asked them about this. They're working on things like injury updates for players. I think, in all honesty and transparency, that should come a lot faster if they've touted that their health and safety program involves daily health and wellness checkups, which they have done. That's on their website. That was reported preseason. I think those things should come a lot faster than they are. But I'm just waiting for them to officially make an announcement on how players are doing. And we have already seen some of the guys who missed out on the second night of weekend 1 will be back this coming weekend. So we'll just, as you say, monitor it from week 1 to week 4 or however we go and see what the league looks like then.
For sure.
I think, what were you going to add there?
Oh, I was going to say one other thing. I'm looking at the SlamBall website right now. Sorry if I look like I'm distracted. I'm not. I'm actually looking at, so we're 1 week in, yes, and I'm looking at, there's no stats on the website, right? No. There's no league leaders.
So the league does have that data, and they've currently got it on a third-party site, which I can send you the link for. It's in the description of any of the bounce-off videos that have come out this week, and I can put it on Twitter as well. This is for official public consumption. This is not something I'm putting out there as press that shouldn't be out there. There is a third-party stats page right now that the league is working on incorporating into their official website, but they've just not got that system set up yet. But there are stats out there. If anyone needs the link, send me a DM on Twitter. Well, you can't now. It's not even Twitter anymore. But it'll be, it'll be out in the ether. And you can find this information. The obviously stat leader in terms of points is Ty McGee, the guy who scored 43 in a game. But someone I wasn't very high on weekend one is Bryce Moraine, who was the first overall pick, the baby brawn, and he's actually, I think, second, or actually might be first in points per game because he averaged 23.5 over the 2 games he played, which doesn't show up when you're watching the games, but looking at the stats.
How did Trevor Anderson's kid do?
I am so incredibly low on him after week one because my interview with his teammate, he said he's going to be as good as Bryce Moraine. And Brian Bell Anderson, TA's son, I think he scored 6 points over the 2 games.
Right. I don't get it. I just watching him, he seems way undersized for the game.
He is the youngest in the league by everyone else at a minimum is 1999. He's the only person born in 2001 and the only person that would have been born in 2000 from people who were in the squad lists pre-season. The taxi squad might differ that, but I think he's the youngest and very light size-wise.
So he's 21, 22 years old?
Yeah. So he is the youngest, which young, if you want to take from that, and I think Keenan Love mentioned to me off camera that he's also had some neck injury issues. So, but he's also, his position in terms of playing college football was defensive minded. So if you're looking at him, ideally you want him to be a perimeter defense guy in SlamBall, but if he's being touted as he was 7th overall in the draft, you want to be seeing some more scoring than just 3 points a game.
Right. And I think that's the big thing is like, you don't draft your first pick of your team to be defensive minded. I think that, and this is just me making a total assumption. I think Trevor's a phenomenal person, but I think he drafted his kid because he didn't want to play on any other team.
And
right.
I mean, you mentioned the storytelling aspect of SlamBall. The production company behind it is responsible for producing things like the Last Dance documentary and the Redeem Team documentary on Netflix. And you might not know this, draft day was Father's Day. So he drafted his son on Father's Day. They're already producing content surrounding the two of them and also looking at filming a bunch of stuff to produce a documentary by the end of the season. So there's a lot of things that just line up really well and are nice and will be a good story. But the question is how much of the hype is accurate about him.
So funny story before we go. And I know that we're running up against it. But so the same thing happened 20 years ago where they had a documentary team following them around and they led to like a documentary about SlamBall that aired on Spike. I was one of the guys that they followed around because like I was a great story, right? I was this guy from, I don't know if you know a whole lot about my story, but I was this guy from the internet. I was a fan. I was talking about it on allsports.com, which was like the official SlamBall website, right? The SlamBall message board. And I was like, I want to play this game, whatever, blah, 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 blah. So I was the internet guy who got invited to play. And so they followed me around as this like feel good story. And the internet was a totally different time back in the day, right? It's this crazy guy from the internet coming in. And I took it like really seriously, like leading up to it. I was really good on the trampolines. I was in great shape. I wasn't as strong as all the other guys. And but I could do things on the tramp that eventually got me drafted. But I got drafted. And it was all like, it wasn't like coach walks up, they announce who they want. Then the next coach has to figure out who they want. It was all pre-planned, right? Sorted out beforehand. And they went through and they drafted everybody. So I had to wait. I was the last pick of the draft. I was the 8th pick in the 8th round. And I was so mad by the time that I got picked because I was seeing guys that I thought just were horrible being drafted in front of me, right? I was like, why am I not being drafted right now? Because I knew I was better than them, right? So they'd been following me around with all these cameras for, the better part of a couple of weeks leading up to this. And it's like, hey, it's this great, whatever, great story. And then I get drafted and they shove this camera in my face. Like, how does it feel? And I'm like, I'm just ready to fucking go. And I'm like, so mad. I'm so mad. And I think like at that point, I was like, well, we can't include Craig in the documentary because they're expecting me to be like, oh, I'm so happy to be here. It's such a dream. I was like, man, I'm ready to fucking tear somebody's head up. Sorry, I don't know if I can curse or not.
No, go for it.
But I've been cursing all day. But I was so upset. And, so the story, once again, it goes back to the production company behind this. They're into storytelling. I think it all lines up with what you were saying, but just a little funny little side note for you right there.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for taking time to speak to me and for featuring on Bounce Off, Craig. We'll hopefully get you again in the future for something. Where can people find you if they want to talk to you about SlamBall or any of your other endeavors?
You can find me on Twitter on X, just at Stuttering Craig over there, which is great. And you can find me and I'll talk about SlamBall. I'll talk about video games, talk about all the things that I do on a day-to-day basis. And you can probably be mad at me for something. Somebody already probably is online. So that's all right.
I was going to joke when you were saying you could be the Shaq or the Kenny or the Charles. I was just like, we need an inside SlamBall with you, me, and Coach Berkoff. That would be great.
Let's go. Let's do it. I will absolutely do that. I would love that. I would love to be a commentator about SlamBall. I
mean, you and me both. That's why both of us are talking about it so much, which is great. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for everyone listening and watching at home. Enjoy the games this weekend, and let's look forward to weekend number 2. It's going to be a great time.
Go Bandits! Wait.
Go Buzz. We'll see. Perfect. Thank you.